Tell me a secret, a story, a tale of what this week's topic may consist of entail. Poverty. What's the deal of it? Well, honey, today we are going to be truly getting into things. The secrets of poverty galore. Now, I will just do a quick disclaimer here. Everything in this video is just my personal opinion. You are more than welcome to correct me if you think I'm wrong. In fact, I welcome you to correct me if I'm wrong. Let's get this discussion going. Poverty is an awful thing, and the more talks we can have over how we can potentially end the darn thing, the better. Okay, so what really is it though? Well, essentially it's greed. I think everyone knows that. Pretty much 99.999% of poverty comes from the elite top percent hoarding wealth from literally everyone else. But how on earth did we get there? Because I personally think it was the 50s. I wasn't alive in the 50s, so I might be a bit off here. But there was a point in time, potentially between the 1950s and the 1980s, when the economy was going really insanely well, and I don't know why. I don't know whether it was because America had just come out of a war, which had literally left everyone else crippled but them, or whether it was lots of new businesses and powerful unions, but something was going down that made the average wage have a heck of a lot more buying power, and everyone went crazy over it. Now, we all know history. I'm not going to go getting into the long extended spiel over it, but basically there were two different types of people. There always are, and unless you've been through enough to never quite trust your immediate surroundings and environment, you're nearly always the first group. Okay, now what is it? What are these two groups of people? Well, the first group is just happy. They go, ooh, money, and enjoy their lives. They enjoy living in the moment. They appreciate the fun times, because who wouldn't? What is life but for living? They go out, they eat, they enjoy time with their friends, and they think, what a beautiful life, and they just live it. Good on them. And then there's a secondary group. These are either people who have gone through some extremely tough times, or maybe just have a few more brain cells dedicated towards the future, but they're basically all like, hang on a minute, this ain't gonna last forever, I need to look out for myself, and they put aside some resources for later. And then there's also this super secret subgroup inside the secondary people, and they're a bit more crafty, They don't just put resources aside, they're actively scheming on how to exploit as much out of their resources as they can. They're the ones who intend to ensure that their future turns out exactly how they want it to be. What I've just described is the lower, middle and upper class. Now hold on now, isn't that a really toxic opinion to be held? People do not deserve to be poor, and to insinuate that they are because of bad decisions in life is an awful thing to say. And yes, you're right, I'm glad you brought that up. I think this is also about the time we need to recognise that the 1950s was also a very different time in regards to values and people's mindsets. Well, I hope it was anyway. Basically what I'm saying is that in my opinion, between the 50s and the 80s was a very big make or break time for us. Again, I could be very wrong here, but in my opinion, if you take the people that were actively working to set up their businesses and ensure their futures, combined with the incredible amounts of closed-mindedness, less articulate laws surrounding workforce discrimination, not to mention what's acceptable or not in regards to racist and discriminatory behaviour, as well as the invention of the credit card of all things, the 1950s was the founding platform towards a lot of what is now here today. Your ancestry line were rich? Cool! Chances are you have a lot less student debt these days and you're living quite comfortably now. Your ancestry line thought to plan ahead and start businesses. Well, chances are you're probably doing extremely well too. And if not, you at least have a higher chance of having a guaranteed job and practically zero debt. Racism though, abuse, these were attitudes that never quite went away. Just as the 50s were a platform of what's going on today, doesn't mean that there's a dark underbelly that's not exempt. And I am beyond grateful for the social change and progress that we continue to make every day, but think of it in terms like this. If you're getting told and treated like there are parts of you that are not acceptable, and you actively resent the person who is telling you this, do you think that those parts of you are magically going to go away? Heck no! They don't just vanish. You might hide them, sure. The only thing that's happened is now they're sneakier. And I don't know about you guys, but I've been seeing a lot of these sneaky attitudes coming forth in the way people of colour get automatically seen as more of a threat. The way women's feelings and voices get pushed to the side because of the stereotype of woman being too emotional. Or even the whole thing of, this guy, Arnold, he couldn't possibly do anything wrong. Who? You? Who even are you? Complaining that he did X, Y, Z to you. Honey, you must be a liar. Or somehow deserving of what it is that happened to you. Regardless, though, with these platforms of setting up businesses, taking advantages of an easier economical time, plus the platforms of racism and workplace discrimination, can you see how the 1950s, they were a very big developing point for not only poverty, but generational based poverty as well. People who were born poor and were raised poor have higher statistics of not having access to the same quality of education and resources. They aren't taught the same money tricks and hacks that the rich have, and even if they knew them, don't necessarily have access to the funds available to play around as the rich and successful do. People who come from differing levels of wealth have different levels of stress as well. And call me a stereotypical generalist here, but when you're freaking out because you don't know how you're going to pay for food and rent and power and gas and all the scary debt collectors sending you messages all the time, chances are you're going to be a lot shorter fused as well. Chuck that into the mix with a kid or children who are most likely acting out because their stomachs are empty, because they're not eating right, and they're also tired and cranky because their rooms are too cold to sleep in, plus a partner who are dealing with all these same stresses and more, plus having to walk on eggshells around everyone else, and most likely having to look out for friends and family who are even worse off than them. Can you see how there are going to be problems arising from everybody being in a worse state of mind and not necessarily having the right tools available to deal with all this? Raising a family in this situation as well, it's reaffirming behavioural patterns and relationship dynamics that become a role model for what you base your life off. And then, my friend, when you start getting discriminated against at work and job interviews because maybe you can't afford the appropriate workplace environment and clothing, you have to feed yours or someone else's baby this week, so now you can't afford transport. Or you might not even know all the right people to get you that job in the first place. Can you start to see how poverty becomes generational? Not to mention the whole thing about the more educated and progressive a society or culture becomes, the less children get born to teenage parents or into poverty as is. Alright, so we've covered why poverty is, but how are we going to solve it? And most importantly, why can't we solve it? Here is a book. It's called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Read this book. It reveals the rich man's mindset. It will also reveal how no matter what they do, they will win every time. Because when people earn too much, we tax them, right? So what do we do when the government raises the taxes? Because we don't want to lose all our hard-earned money, right? We want to be able to actually afford to live, right? Well, the poor person, they'll most likely get another job to try to afford this week's rent and be taxed on that as well. Then the corrupt rich person, well, they'll tie everything up in their businesses and corporations. Everything they want will become a business perk that they can then claim their tax back on. And all their money is simply an asset of the business. I mean, you can't get taxed when you don't have any money to begin with, right? Well, what about wages? We deserve to be paid more, We deserve to be able to afford what we eat, let alone the air that we breathe. Well, wrong. I mean, technically you're right, but by the time the government's finally made it mandatory to raise everyone's wages, businesses have already factored that in to the cost of their items and then raised the prices even more for their time. So not only are you back to square one in how little you've afforded things, well, you've technically gone backwards because you've just had a pay raise, honey. You are so entitled and grateful. Why are you asking for more as it is? Businesses can and will continue to raise their prices whenever and however they feel like it, and it is already beyond hard and lengthy for governments to raise that wage higher. So what about subsidies? What about food grants? What about helping people who cannot afford their food? Well, where are we going to get that money from, eh? From our taxes? You make me laugh. All taxing does is punish the poor for being poor, which is already out of their control as it is. I mean, best case scenario, the rich will dance through the loopholes in their government company-sponsored everything, or even worse, take their companies overseas where our laws and taxations don't apply and now we're out of several jobs. People already do that so much as it is. The amount of people I've seen fleeing New Zealand alone because the jobs market is so freaking impossible to try and crack into. Not to mention there are better prospects overseas, wages where we can actually afford to eat and rent, or simply because people want to actually keep the money they're making in the first place. All you're doing is narrowing down the population to those who physically can't leave. You are crippling the country and the economy and are practically serving up a death sentence to make us as low functioning as possible. Not to mention, that could also be why tall poppy syndrome is a thing. And might not happen all today, or even all at once, but it's happening. And yes, I know very much that I'm way over time already, but this needs to be heard and spoken about. This is why we are not solving all our poverty issues. The gap between the filthy rich and the poor is so vast that even those who could have survived and done well back in the 1950s to the 80s, they simply cannot today because those circumstances just aren't there anymore. I mean, it's hard enough trying to survive as it is, let alone actively move forward in life. So in clarification, do I hate the rich? No. Do I hate businesses? Also no. They're probably the one way we even have a hope of making it out of this mess at all. Supporting small businesses is our one way out. They provide jobs, still have some semblance of humanity that you can sometimes lose in the larger corporations, and are not in the position to undercut the market / drive other businesses into an unnecessarily grave to be the only ones out there. Get alongside other smaller businesses and build them up so that they have a chance against the massive corporations like Walmart and Amazon. Take classes, upskill yourself. Find a way that you can become an entrepreneur and make businesses too. And when you get there, give back to the community that supported you and helped you make it this far. Invest in your employees' training and education. Give them training and official qualifications so that they have a fighting chance when they leave, but keep the terms of your employment so good that they won't want to. You'll go so much further and have such a better quality of workforce. Oh, that and not to mention a more bartering-based networking is how I see a way out also. With everything becoming so expensive and unattainable, the only way we will be able to take our power back in regards to money is by making it meaningless. When we provide other options for each other, when we are growing and making and trading and networking in ways which means we don't have to spend the little coins in our wallet or the numbers on our screens if we don't want to, only then will we be able to demand better quality from those soulless corporations who would rather raise their prices to profit than place a value on a human life. When we can demonstrate that we don't need them to survive or even get by, then they risk losing our business, and only then will they start to reconsider. Business owners who are in the position to potentially get all these business perks, maybe turn them back on your community as well. Provide food, dental, medical, training. Provide anything and everything you can for them. They're already bartering away substantial chunks of their own life force just so you can make a profit. And yes, I know it's never just as simple as what I've outlined, but I really hope that if nothing else, this can at least be the start of a discussion on a potential way forward. Thank you for your time and attention, and be sure to tune in next week. Subscribe!